Okay, welcome back to the classes after a break. So hope I'm audible as well as visible to you all. Just confirm that. Welcome to all. Good afternoon, and welcome to all. So hope I'm audible as well as visible to you all. Right? Done. Done. So we made an effort in understanding the biomes of the world and their characteristics. Biomes of the world, their characteristics, along with that, certain issues associated with them. And while defining that, we come across certain types of the species called as keystone species, etc. They are very important to remember the definitions in the later stage. In the later stage. So we made an effort in understanding all the aspects with reference to the evolution, with reference to something called as the spread of biodiversity. That is, the main reason is the continental drift theory or plate tectonic theory, which dispersed the biodiversity throughout the earth. That is global distribution of biodiversities because of the impact of the continental drift theory. Right. Now, we'll make an effort in understanding a term called as ecotone and edge effect. Ecotone and edge effect. So, what is an ecotone and what is an edge effect? Now, while defining the tropical grassland, I told that in the African continent, in the African continent, there is a grassland. This grassland is referred as the Sahel grassland. Grassland. And above the Sahel grassland, in the northern side, it is a desert, and below the Sahel grassland. So here you are having fertile land or forest area, fertile or forest area. So we find Sahel grassland is separating the two biomes. One is the desert biome, and second one is the forest biome. So Sahel is referred as ecotone, or this grassland is ecotone here. Grassland is ecotone here. So what is ecotone? Ecotone, in a very simple term, it is an area. It is an area which separates two biomes. Which separates two biomes, or which separates two diverse ecosystem. Two diverse ecosystem. We refer that as an ecotone. And here, in this example, grassland is an ecotone. Grassland is an ecotone, which is separating the desert on one side and forest on other side. Forest on other side. So we refer that as ecotone. So any area which separates the two diverse ecosystem, that is, here it is desert and forest area, and in between that you are having the grassland. Grassland. So grassland separates the two biomes or two diverse ecosystem. We refer that as ecotone. Now this ecotone can be natural or it can be man-made. It can be natural or man-made, which separates the biomes. Which separates the biomes or ecosystem. Diverse ecosystem. Right. Then this ecotone can be very broad or it can be narrow. It is not fixed boundary. So it can be broad or it can be very narrow. Right. Now, this is not an administrative boundary. It is not an administrative boundary. Administrative boundary means if you take the two states, take Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. So in between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, we will have an administrative boundary which completely demarcates the geographical area of Karnataka from geographical area of Tamil Nadu. The boundary divides, separates the geographical area of Karnataka and geographical area of Tamil Nadu. That is boundary which is separating them. But if you take the people who are speaking Kannada linguistic area, the people who are speaking Kannada language, so they are very dominant in Karnataka, but the moment when you cross the boundary, you don't find the number of the Kannada people are more, they decreases. It abruptly do not ends. Abruptly, Kannada speaking people will not end. So the number of Kannada speaking people decreases when you enter into Tamil Nadu, and the Tamil speaking people increases in that area. And if you are moving from Tamil Nadu to Karnataka, so the moment when you reaches to the boundary of Tamil Nadu, till there you will have more amount of Tamil speaking people. But when you enter into Karnataka, the number of people who speaks Tamil will reduce and the number of people who speaks Kannada will increase. So you can't divide that area. You can't make a very specific division of the linguistic areas which can speak Kannada and which can speak Tamil. It reduces from one area to another. The influence of one language reduces when you are moving. So here, if you are moving from Karnataka to Tamil Nadu, the influence of Kannada decreases from Karnataka towards the Tamil Nadu. But if you are moving from Tamil Nadu to Karnataka, the influence of the Tamil speaking people decreases and the Kannada speaking people increases. You can't demarcate that completely. And such areas which cannot be demarcated, we refer them as transition area, where one area is replaced by something. So hence ecotones cannot be demarcated completely. They are referred as transitional areas. So they are transitional areas. They are transitional areas. Right. So where the one biome ends and other starts there. Influence of both are there. So as it is transitional area, we can find the influence of both. If you take the transitional area, you will find Kannada speaking people, you will find the Tamil speaking people also. So as it is a transitional area, so it will have both the species. As it is transitional area, it will have the species of desert, it will have the species of the forest area. So this area will have both species. It will have both the species of the biomes. That is, here the desert and grassland will also be there. So it will have both the species of the biomes plus its own species will also be there. Plus its own species. Its own species. So hence these ecotones, along with their native species, other species of the neighboring areas will also be there. So hence ecotones are rich in biodiversity. So hence they are rich in biodiversity. Rich in biodiversity. Remember this. They are always rich in biodiversity because they have their own species plus the species of the neighboring biomes can also be seen. Can also be seen here. Right. So they are rich in biodiversity. Now, next important thing is these ecotones, as the number of species enters there is nothing called as coexistence. They always compete with each other. So the species will always compete with each other. Species will compete with each other. And as the species are always competing for the niche, so remember that competition exclusion principle, as they compete for the niche, So hence this area is also referred as tensional area. So it is called as zone of tension. Zone of tension. Even though it is rich in biodiversity, even though it is rich in biodiversity, but in spite of that, it is zone of tension where we always find conflicts are there, competitions are there to acquire their territories. So such areas we refer them as ecotones, right? It can be natural or man-made, it can be narrow or broad, it is a transitional area, it is a region where both species can be seen along with its native species, and it is very rich in biodiversity. So this is something called as ecotone and ecotone characteristics, right? So man-made means sometimes if you are having any areas, slowly any mountain areas are there, in between that you have sown some grasses, small grasses are there, so we refer them as man-made areas. A patch of a grassland which is created by human beings, we refer that as man-made. Or if you are having a rainforest, and other side you are having a grassland, in between that you plant certain trees which can be a combination of grass as well as the big trees, we refer that as man-made type of, well, man-made type. Now here, apart from that ecotone, we come across edge effect. Edge effect. Now we will take the same example here. We will take the same example here. Right. Now in this example we are having a grassland. Grassland is there, and then we are having a biomes, that is desert biome and forest biome. So the species of the desert biome and the species of the forest biomes can be seen here. Like it will have reptiles, like snakes will be there. It will have the species of forest, like deers will be there. Deer will be there. It can also have the species like birds which are seen in the grasslands. So snakes will be there, deers will be there, birds will be there, dogs will be there, right? So it will have the species of both the areas. But among these species, if you take a look of these species, among these species we find the number of one species, or the number of certain species, or their density, the number of species or density of one or few, one or few, which is higher than other, higher than other, right? So we find number of species or density of one species or few species is higher than others, and we refer this phenomenon where the number of species or density of the species which is higher than other, we refer this as edge effect. Edge effect. And the species whose number is more, and the species whose number and density is more, the species whose density and number is more, we refer this as edge species. Edge species. And in the context of the grassland biome or grassland ecotone, the bird species will be higher than that of other species. So in this grassland ecotone, the edge species will be birds, whose density and population will be higher than the other species. Will be higher than other species. So the edge species varies from one type of ecotone to another type of ecotone. In this example, if the grassland is an ecotone, so in the grassland you will find the birds population is dominant, and we refer this as an edge species, and the effect is referred as edge effect. Is it clear? Now the definition is something like this. It may be wider or narrow. So ecotone means which separates the two biomes or two diverse ecosystems. Two biomes or two diverse ecosystems. It can be wide or narrow. It can be a zone of tension. Why? Because it is rich in biodiversity. Then it can contain species of both along with its own, and it can be natural or man-made. Right. So here a population or community of one species which is more than others, we refer that as edge effect. And the most abundant species in the ecotone is referred as edge species. Example, birds in the grassland. Birds in grassland ecotone. It is an example of the edge species there. So this is some rough idea about ecotone and edge effect. Ecotone and edge effect. Is it clear? Now next, we'll take up some of the important ecotones. Right. Now, some of the important ecotones is wetland ecosystem. So the moment when we say wetland, so wetland is an ecotone. So remember, wetland is an ecotone. Ecotone means it is transition area. It is transition area between two biomes, that is terrestrial biome, and other side you are having aquatic biome. And in between that, this is called as the wetland. This is ecotone. So hence wetland is an ecotone between terrestrial and the aquatic ecosystem. We refer that as wetland. And as it is a ecotone, so obviously it is very rich in biodiversity. Biodiversity. Right. And when you take a look of its data, 40% of the world's plants and animal species breed in this wetland ecosystem, which is an ecotone between the land as well as that of the aquatic systems. Now, how do you define a wetland ecosystem? In a very simple term, we can say that any land area which is saturated with water, and it has taken a distinct characteristics and has taken a distinct characteristic we refer that as wetland. Distinct characteristic, we refer that as wetlands. Now these wetlands can be man-made or they can be natural. So these wetlands, they can be man-made or they can be natural. Natural means ponds, lakes, rivers, etc. So they can be man-made or they can be natural. So man-made means sometimes when we make irrigation project, we store a water there. When we make an irrigation project, we store a water there. So it is man-made. Or sometimes the lakes which have been constructed by the human beings for storing the water. Lake which is constructed for storing the water. So we refer them as man-made types, man-made and natural. Or we can classify the wetlands. Into again two ways. That is inland wetlands, that is pond, lake, etc. Or we can classify them as coastal wetlands. Coastal wetlands. Example, deltas, estuary. Example, mangroves. Mangroves. So they can be coastal or they can be inland. They can be man-made or they can be natural as well. Natural as well. And they are very rich in biodiversity. They are very rich in biodiversities. Now, any wetland, if it is dominant by woody plants, any wetland, if it is dominated by woody plants, like this, big trees inside. So we refer that as the swamp. We refer this as swamp. Swamp. And if any wetland dominated by grasses or reed or the weeds, we refer this as marshy area or marshy wetland. Example, we have Run of Kutch, marshy area of Run of Kutch. Then if any wetland is dominated by undecomposed wood called as peat, if it is dominant by peat, peat means undecomposed wood of dead plants. Undecomposed wood, peat, we refer that as bog. We refer that as bog. Bog. So wetland can be swamp, it can be in the form of marshy, or it can be in the form of bog, like Kerala, where the backwaters of Kerala, they will have large amount of peat deposits are there. Peat deposits. It includes dams and reservoirs also. Yes, they are also referred as wetlands. Dams, project where we construct. So they are also man-made wetlands. They are also man-made wetlands. Perfect. Right. So any area where the water is seen, which is saturated water, we refer that as wetland. Now these wetlands, they store 30% of land-based carbon in them. So always remember, in the coastal areas, in the coastal ecosystem, where we find mangroves are there, the weeds are there, so they store the carbon. They store the carbon. And this carbon which is stored in the coastal ecosystem, like mangroves, we refer this as blue carbon. We refer this as blue carbon. Blue carbon, which is stored in them, right? And as these woodland ecosystems or wetland ecosystems, when they store large amount of the carbon dioxide in the form of peat or in the form of the sequestration, so we refer them as the carbon sinks. So these wetlands are also referred as carbon sink. Carbon sink, which stores large amount of the carbon dioxide. So oceans are the greatest carbon sinks, and within the oceans, the coastal ecosystems, including the mangroves, which stores the carbon dioxide in them in the form of photosynthesis or any activities. So that carbon which is stored, we refer that as blue carbon. So hence, wetlands are also referred as the carbon sinks. Wetlands are also referred as the carbon sinks. Is it clear? So remember this about the wetlands. Right. Now, these wetlands are very important. And the wetlands plays an important role in the context of economic development of any region. Now, we needed a definition of a wetland which can be unanimously accepted by many countries of the world. And that is where, to understand its significance, understand its importance, we made an effort in having a convention. Now, here, before moving down to the convention, understand the terms which are seen in the context of the further discussions. We come across the term called as convention, right? We come across the term called as the signatories. We come across the term called as protocol. And then we have the term called as ratification. So wetlands are blue carbons. Yes, or the carbon which is stored in the coastal ecosystems, not all the wetlands. The coastal ecosystems, we refer them as blue carbon. And the carbon which is stored in the dead undecomposed, we refer that as peatland. So wetland consists of peatland plus blue carbon. Coastal ecosystem, the live plants which have stored them, mangroves are having blue carbon, whereas the dead undecomposed plants, they are referred as peatlands. So peatlands are also carbon sink, and the vegetation which are live, which are not yet dead, so they are referred as blue carbon. Is it clear? So remember, the wetlands have two types. They can have peatlands and they can have the blue carbon as well. Is it clear? Is it clear about the carbon? So wetlands will have peatland as well as the blue carbon. Blue carbon is in the live plants. Perfect. Now, what is convention, what is signatories, and what is the protocol? Now, in the context of international meeting, when the international meeting is done between two or more countries, so their issue is discussed. Important issue is discussed. Like, it can be labor issue, it can be the global warming issue, it can be biodiversity issue. So such issues are discussed. And these issues, they will have certain terms. And these terms which are discussed and negotiated, where in the international meeting, the terms which are discussed and negotiated in the international meetings, so these terms we refer them as conventions. So these terms which are discussed, we refer them as conventions. Now, there are many countries which agree to that, and they will sign to that. So those countries which agree to these convention, to these terms, they sign that, we refer them as signatories to the convention. Now, these conventions can be two types. They can be legally binding and they can be not binding. Legally binding and they can be not binding. They will define them as binding and not binding. Now, the country which have signed that, it does not mean that the country will have legally binding on that. Signing means it is endorsing. The country which has signed, means it is endorsing that. It means it is agreeing to that. Agree does not mean that whatever you say will implement by the country. I agree, it does not mean that I will implement that. There are good points, I agree that these are good points, but I am not going to apply in my country. I am agreeing to that. So we refer them as not binding. I am a signatory, but it is not binding in that. So if you talk about example, there is a convention, the convention X is there, which is discussed, And to discuss this X conventions, 100 countries have meeting. So these 100 countries, they are having the meeting to discuss the X agenda. 100 countries have met. And out of these 100 countries, it's not that all the countries will agree to that. All the countries will not endorse to that. So out of these 100, out of these 100, so say around 70 countries have agreed to that. Say around 70 countries have agreed to that. Agreed to that. So it means that 70 countries have signed to that. They are signatory to that. It does not mean that they are legally binding to that. They agree to that. They endorse to that. But but within these countries which have signed, within these countries which have signed, we come across certain countries which not only agree to that, they will use the terms in their national laws. There are certain countries, say around 30 countries are there within that who have signed. So these 30 countries, they will accept the terms which are referred in the convention, plus they will implement them. They will implement them in their own countries, implement in own countries or own state, own countries or own states, by making legislation or through the acts, through the acts. So it means they are becoming officially part of that. So it means officially agreeing to the convention, officially agreeing to the convention. And any country which has officially agreed to that, which makes the acts and implement them in their national laws, this is referred as ratification. This is referred as ratification. And any country which has made ratification, then it is legally binding. So these 30 countries which are ratified, so they will be legally binding. It will be legally binding to these 30 countries. These 30 countries. So when we ratify that, then it becomes legally binding. Now take an example of in the context of India. India has not only signed Ramsar Convention, India has ratified Ramsar Convention. India has not only signed Ramsar Convention, India has ratified Ramsar Convention. So it means that the terms and conditions of Ramsar Conventions are binding for India. And we are implementing the Ramsar points in different acts. In the same way, the biodiversity. India is not only the part of a convention on biodiversity, we have ratified the convention on biodiversity. And that's why we have made an act called as Biodiversity Act of India. And we are implementing the points of convention of biodiversity through the acts in India. And we refer that as ratification. All the countries which have ratified, it means that they are legally binding. Ratification means officially accepting the convention, officially accepting the convention, officially accepting the convention. Is that clear? And any country which has officially accepted, then they will get all the benefit which have been there for the convention. So they will get financial support, they will get technical support only when they are ratified. The moment when they are ratified, when they are legally binding, then they will get support from the convention. They will get the support from convention. Support means they will get financial support, they will get technical support, knowledge support in the context of any convention. So remember, convention and ratification. Signatories means who have agreed to that, and conventions may be binding, may not be legally binding, but if it is ratified, then it is 100% binding. If it is ratified, then 100% it is binding to the countries which have ratified that. Countries which have ratified that. So convention, ratification. Now, the original convention has been done. The act which has done in India, like any act which is done. So we want to bring some changes in that. We want to bring some changes in that. Some changes. So you can't completely rub the convention and make a new one. So there is a method in which the amendment can be done. So one of the way to amend the convention to bring the changes, we refer that as protocol. One of the way to bring the changes in the original convention, we refer that as protocol, like Kyoto Protocol, right? Montreal Protocol, right? Cartagena Protocol, Nagoya Protocol. So protocols are amendment, changes which are introduced in the original convention. Changes which are introduced in the original convention. So protocol means it is to introduce the changes in the original convention. Original convention. Is that clear? So here also protocols can be binding, or sometimes they cannot be legally binding. But if it is ratified, then 100% it is legally binding. Is it clear? Convention, protocol, and ratification. I hope it is clear to you all. Convention, this is what the international aspects are seen. Convention, protocol, and ratification. So when we say convention, it can be legally binding or it may not be. But if it is ratified, then 100% it is binding, legally binding. And protocol is one of the way where we can make some changes. Okay. We have one convention, original convention, which has been done. Take an example of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. That is original convention. Now we want to make some change in that. You can't completely remove UNFCCC. So instead of that, you will make some changes. And the changes which have been introduced in the original convention is through protocol. That is Kyoto Protocol. Which has been done to bring some changes in the original convention. So protocols are a way in which the amendment which is done to the original convention to introduce changes, one of the way in which the changes have been introduced. It defines the norms and standards which have to be maintained. Protocol means norms and standards which have to be maintained when we amend the convention and implement them. Is it clear? Okay. So this is what we refer them as conventions, protocols, and ratification. So please revise them and keep them in your mind. Now, keeping that thing in the mind, we will try to understand the Ramsar Convention on Wetland. So Ramsar Convention on the Wetland means it is where the world countries met in the Iran. So the countries of the world, they met in the Iran, and in Iran, in a city called as Ramsar. Ramsar. So in this Ramsar city, where they met for the first time in 1971 to discuss something about the wetland and the definition of wetland. And this definition of wetland, which is accepted by the Ramsar Convention, is unanimously agreed by all the countries, because country A will have its own criteria for wetland, country B will have its own criteria, country C will have its own, country Z will have its own criteria. So every country will have different criteria. It is very difficult to maintain them in the global standard. So hence they met in Ramsar to have a uniform definition, a definition of wetland which can be accepted by all the countries. So here a single definition was created, which is accepted by all countries. All countries. And this convention defines the wetland as, so the Ramsar convention, the meeting which was held, it defines the wetland. It defines the wetland, which is accepted by all the members, all the countries, as definition of wetland as one, any water, any type of water, which can be fresh water, which can be saline water, or it can be brackish water, any type of water. Second, this water, it can be flowing or it can be stagnant, that is lotic as well as lentic, or stagnant. Stagnant. Flowing means like rivers. So anything which is flowing, we refer them as lotic ecosystem. And which is stagnant like lakes, ponds, we refer them as lentic. Lentic. Example, the lakes, ponds, etc. So it can be flowing or it can be stagnant. Then third one is this water which is saturated, either permanent or temporary. The saturated water which can be either temporary or permanent. In all the cases, the depth of water should not be more than, or the depth of water should be less than 6 meters. Depth of water should be less than 6 meters. Less than 6 meters. Including the low tides in the ocean, because ocean waters are saline waters. Including the low tide of marine water. Marine means ocean. So why Iran means they decided the place. It was decided that we will meet up in the Iran for the first time, because there were many issues associated with the water and ground, the lakes and ponds in that area. So it made its strong presence to show the reflection. So hence Iran was decided to that. So there will never be any question why Iran. So Iran is a place where the Ramsar Convention was signed. So that is important place. So we refer such water bodies as Ramsar wetlands. So this is the definition of the Ramsar wetland, which is accepted by all the countries which have signed them. So it was adopted on February 2nd, 1971, and it came into force in the year 1975. Which defines the definition of Ramsar wetland. Is it clear? Now, in the context of India, how many Ramsar wetlands are there? How many? Saturated means the water which is filled. It can be dam where it is temporary water, or it can be the rainy water which is there. So it can be saturated means filled with the water, where the water is not percolating downward very fast. Saturated means a dig which is filled with the water. Now, India has how many Ramsar wetlands? If you take the current affairs, at present, India has 80 Ramsar wetlands. 80 Ramsar wetlands. So remember that if you take only wetlands, India has more than 7 lakh wetlands. Out of these 7 lakh wetlands, out of which 80 are Ramsar wetlands. ATR Ramsar wetlands. So it means that there has to be certain criteria to classify the wetland to Ramsar wetlands. There is certain criteria to classify the wetland as Ramsar wetland. Not all the wetlands are Ramsar. Only when they satisfy certain criteria, then we classify them as the Ramsar wetlands. And these are referred as the three pillars of the Ramsar wetlands. So this is the definition. Any area, artificial, permanent, or temporary. The water is static, flowing, fresh, brackish, or saline, including the marine. Marine means ocean. During its low tide, the depth should not exceeding 6 meters. So this is the definition of Ramsar wetland. Definition of Ramsar wetland. Right. Now all the wetlands are not classified as Ramsar wetlands. All wetlands are not Ramsar wetlands. Only few are classified as Ramsar wetlands, which are having certain significance. Now, which wetlands can be classified as the Ramsar wetlands? They should be very important to be known. So, only those wetlands can be classified as Ramsar wetlands, which are very important to give shelter or protect the endangered birds there, which gives shelter to endangered birds and animals, which gives shelter to endangered birds and animals or threatened birds and animals. Second, these wetlands, they make a sustainable development of that area. It means that they play an important role in economic development. They play important role in economic development of area. Development of area. And these wetlands, they are important component of watershed. They play important component of watershed. So they provide shelter for many migratory species. They provide socio-economic development in that areas, and they are having many cultural values. Such important, such important wetlands, we refer them as Ramsar wetlands. Now here they should be an important component of watershed. Watershed means any area wherever the water is accumulated, like pond, lake, or any type rainfall, melting of the glacier. We refer that as watershed. So in geography, you might have studied about that. Watershed means any area where the water is accumulated. Now, these wetlands, they are important component of watershed. Why? Because any area where the wetland is there, the water will percolate downward and it will increase the groundwater. So it will increase the groundwater level will be increased. So hence they are important component of watershed. So such wetlands, we can demarcate them as the Ramsar wetlands. Right. So hence the moment when we talk about the Ramsar wetlands, these Ramsar wetlands, they always work towards wise use of all their wetlands, which can provide not only the shelter, not only the shelters, they can also be used for socio-economic development of area. Socio-economic development of that area. And these wetlands, they also help in increasing the grasses, the big trees in that. And these grasses and big trees will absorb or will get more amount of the birds. So it means it will have biodiversity. It will increase the biodiversity. Then when you plant large amount of when you store large amount of water, so trees will grow, vegetation will grow. This vegetation which is growing there, so it will control the soil erosion. It will control the soil erosion. So it means it is performing environmental functions. It will control the soil erosion. That is, it is performing environmental functions, right? And these wetlands, they always have a threat also. So it is very important to protect them from degradation. Protect them from degradation. From degradation. And this is what we refer them as the wise use of all their wetlands. Only then we refer them as Ramsar wetlands. Next is, many countries are there where they are having many wetlands. Take an example of India. In India, we are having more than 7 lakh wetlands are there. More than 7 lakh wetlands are there. And Indian government proposes to bring these wetlands into Ramsar wetlands so that they can get technical assistance and financial assistance. So it says that the countries should propose. So propose many wetlands there which are having these characteristics. So and bring as many as wetlands under Ramsar Convention. Propose them and bring them under the Ramsar Convention. So out of 7 lakh, India has 80 Ramsar wetlands. 80 has Ramsar wetland. And the moment any wetland gets the status of Ramsar wetland, it will get financial assistance. It will get technical assistance, and it will get knowledge base to protect these rich and important ecotones or biodiversities, right? Then third point it says is that cooperate internationally so that the species which it protects, the species which reach there for breeding, they should be protected. So many species reach there. So generally we come across something called as the birds. Annually they move from one area to another region for breeding. They move from one area to another area for their breeding. It is an annual cycle. They move from one country to another country, like Siberian crane entering into Chilka Lake, birds entering into the Bharatpur Lake, the birds entering into any artificial wetland which is created. So many migratory species of the birds enter into these wetlands. So we need to protect them. So hence it says internationally and trans-border wetlands where we need to protect the species of birds and all. Yes, Amur falcon in Nagaland. So that is one example. Amur falcon in Nagaland. That is one example. You should remember. Is it clear? So these are referred as the 3 pillars of the conventions. Then February 2nd is considered as the International Wetland Day. Why February 2nd? Because on that day, the Ramsar Convention was adopted. February 2nd. So February 2nd is considered as the Ramsar Wetland Day, where the Ramsar Wetland Day was adopted. And every year it will have its own themes. And the theme for 2024 is wetlands and human well-being. Please remember this. The theme is to create awareness about the wetlands. It is to create the awareness among the people. Now the awareness can be about its significance, significance, or awareness may be about restoration. Restoration, or awareness may be for conservation. Conservation, or awareness can be for protection. Right. Significance means benefits. Awareness should be created regarding their benefits, what services they give, what benefits they give, and also give an idea how to restore them. Then conserving these wetlands and protecting these wetlands. So that is where every year we have such types of the themes, which makes awareness among the people regarding significance, restoration, protection, and their conservation. Right. Now, these wetlands, they are not free from any type of functions or any type of pollution. Now, among these wetlands, that is, among the Ramsar wetlands, not all the wetlands, among the Ramsar wetlands, there are few wetlands which have the issue of pollution. And because of the pollution, maybe from industries, maybe from agriculture, or maybe from urbanization. I'm repeating, the pollutants enters there, maybe from industries, maybe from urbanization, or maybe from agricultural activities. So such type of pollutants which enter into the water bodies, they will change their ecological functions, or those wetlands, they are having the possibility of changing their ecological characteristics. Such type of ramsar wetlands where their ecological characteristics have been changing, or possibility of changing are there. I'm repeating, the list of wetlands of international importance. It means that list of Ramsar wetlands, the list of Ramsar wetlands, where there is a change in the ecological functions, or ecological character has already occurred, or it is likely to occur, or occurring. All the three cases: already occurred, occurring, or threat is there. Threat is there because of technological development and increasing population. Technological development and increasing population. It is something which we refer them as due to large amount of industries, urbanization, urban areas, or many such activities where we find large amount of pollutants enters into these Ramsar wetlands, and then they can become a threat. They can pose a threat for the species which take shelter there. The species which take shelter there, or its ecological characteristics completely destroyed there. So such Ramsar wetlands which are having a threat, which may be having a threat, we classify them in a separate record called as Montrac's records. So Montrac's records are the list of Ramsar wetlands which are having the issue of pollution, polluted, or maybe pollution. So they are the part of Ramsar wetlands. Where the ecological characteristics have been changing, or possibility of that. So in the context of India, we are having 80 Ramsar wetlands. Now don't get confused. India has more than 7 lakh wetlands. India has more than 7 lakh wetlands. Out of which 80 wetlands are referred as Ramsar wetlands. And out of these 80 Ramsar wetlands, two wetlands are there which are having a threat. And hence India has two Montrac's records. Indian list of Montrac's record consists of two wetlands. Two are there which are referred as Montrac's record. One is the Keoldev National Park. where we find large amount of algal blooms and other things have been there. Keoldev National Park. This is India's Montrex record. Apart from Keoldev National Park, which is in Rajasthan, we have one more there. One more there. That is referred as the Loktak Lake. So this is the second Montrex record in India. Loktak Lake. Loktak Lake. And this Loktak Lake is in which state? In which state it is there? And this Loktak Lake is known for floating islands. It is known for floating islands. Perfect. Not Assam. It is in Manipur. It is in Manipur. It is the largest freshwater lake in the northeastern part of India. So here it is having floating islands. And these floating islands, we refer them as Fumdis. The floating islands, we refer them as Fumdis. And within these Fumdis, there is a national park. There is a national park. That is Kebul Limjau National Park. National Park. Kebul Limjau National Park. And the significance of this Kebul Limjau National Park is it is the only floating national park of the world. It is the only floating national park of the world. Only floating national park of the world. Not only of India, of the world. It is the only floating national park of the world. Apart from that, in this Kebul Limjau National Park, there is a species which is endemic to that. Endemic means it is native to that. And we refer that as Sangai deer, which is endemic to that. Sangai deer. Or it is referred as dancing deer. Dancing deer. Right, it is freshwater lake, but it is having a threat of pollution. It is one of the freshwater lake, largest freshwater lake in the northeastern part India. So this freshwater lake is having a issue with pollution. So large amount of polluted waters are entering into that. So that is where it is becoming a threat. That is where it has become a threat. So it was a freshwater lake. Now, from the industries, from the agriculture, from urbanization, large amount of water is entering, the polluted water, which has become threat to this fresh lake. So this pollution has become threat to the freshwater lake. So hence it is important to restore them. If you don't restore, then it will collapse, like ecological succession. So at present, we are having two Ramsar wetlands, which are referred as Montrex records. Now, can you give me a example, or can you give me the name of one wetland which was initially classified as Montrex record, but now it has been systematically restored? The wetland which was initially classified as the Montrex record, but now it has been systematically restored. It has been restored. It has been restored completely. And after that, it is removed from Montrex record. Removed from the Montrex record. That is Chilka Lake. Perfect. Chilka Lake. Chilka Lake. So they have made a systematic restoration of that. So initially, Chilka Lake was in the Montrex record. Now, because of systematic restoration, it has been restored completely and it has been removed from Montrex record. And even today, we find two are in the Montrex records in the context of India. Now, regarding that, the recent wetlands of India, Ramsar wetlands, I'll take up in one aspect of Indian geography. Maybe after this biodiversity, the Indian geography, I'll cover that. Indian biodiversity, I'll cover that. Right. Now, mangroves. Next thing is mangroves. right? Now, the moment when you talk about the mangroves, we have to understand certain points of that. So mangroves are ecotones as well as wetlands. So mangroves are wetlands and they are ecotone, and hence they are very rich in biodiversity, rich in biodiversity, wetland as well as ecotone. So how do you define mangroves then? How do you define a mangroves? So mangroves, in a very simple term, we say it is heterogeneous plants. Different, heterogeneous means different plants. Heterogeneous plants. Different plants which have adapted to particular environmental conditions. Adapted to particular environmental conditions. We refer that as mangroves. Now, what environmental conditions they have adapted? What conditions they have adapted? So they are adapted to the condition of salt tolerant, tolerance to the salt, salt tolerant, salt tolerant. Perfect. And apart from that, this area will always have shortage of oxygen. That will be having shortage of oxygen. So they are adapted to shortage of oxygen, and any area where there is a shortage of oxygen is there, we refer that as hypoxic. So they have adapted to hypoxic condition. Hypoxic condition. They are adapted to hypoxic condition. Right. So such types of vegetations we refer them as the mangroves. And if you see the mangroves, so mangroves are in the tropical areas. They are in the tropical areas. And they are intertidal vegetation. They are intertidal vegetation. Intertidal vegetation. Now, what is intertide? Any idea what is intertide? So, in the context of the oceanography, in the context of oceanography, this is an ocean. This is an ocean, and here we find the ocean will have the water and perfect. So here it will have the areas which we refer them as the water which is pushed towards the coastal, which will create high tide area, and the water again retreats backward. We refer that as low tide area. Low tide area. And this region between the high tide and low tide, we refer that as intertidal area. Intertidal area. Perfect. So these are the intertidal forest or intertidal vegetation. Intertidal vegetation. Now, if you take a global cover of mangroves, global cover of mangroves, global cover. Any idea when you talk about the global cover? So the global extent is 14.7 million hectares. 14.7 million hectares. Like now, country-wise, when we make a look of that, Indonesia has 19% of the global mangrove. Indonesia has 19% of the global mangrove. And along with Indonesia, Brazil has 9%. Brazil has 9%. Then we are having Nigeria, which is having 7% of global mangroves. So this is the global mangroves cover. And these mangroves, they always have adaptability. for salt tolerant as well as hypoxic condition. And as they have adopted to that, we define them as the halophytes. So we refer them as halophytes. Halophytes, which are salt tolerant as well as which have adjusted to the hypoxic conditions. Adjusted to the hypoxic conditions. Is it clear? So this is where we find they are in the tropical areas. Tropical areas. So India's we will take first. Understand this, then a separate slide is there for India. We'll focus on this mangroves and this. Now how the adaptability is done, how they have made adaptability. So they have made some anatomical and physiological modification by which they adjust to the salinity and hypoxic condition. They have created succulent leaves. Succulent leaves means fleshy leaves. Fleshy leaves which can store water. Store water. And they have sunken stomata. They have sunken stomata. Sunken means reduced stomata. So what is the role of stomata in the leaves? What is the role of stomato in the leaves? Stomato. So stomatos are the regions which are there for transpiration, not respiration. Transpiration, air exchange. So if the stomatos are sunken, then the transpiration or exchange of gases will not be there. So it means they will maintain fresh water and maintain the moisture within them. That is called as sunken stomata and succulent leaves. And as there is having a deficiency of the oxygen, so they have the roots which move upward. So they have the roots which grows upward. And these roots do not provide any mechanical supports. They move upward. If this is the surface, they move upward. And they will have some holes, pores, in which they can take the oxygen. So they are not the true roots. And hence they are referred as nematophores or false roots. False roots. And it is to absorb the oxygen. And as they grow upward against the gravity, so we refer them as negative geotrophic. Perfect. They are referred as negative geotrophic. Geotrophic, where they move against the gravity. They move upward rather than moving down. They move upward, negative traffic. And the seed starts to grow when they are attached to the plant. The seeds, that is the embryo, they starts to grow when they are attached to the plant. Attached to the plant. We refer them as vivipary seeds. They start growing still attached to the plant. We refer them as vivipary seeds. And then they are having the stilt roots, which provides them support. Which provide them supports. And these are referred as the anatomical as well as physiological modification for the mangroves. Is it clear? So remember these points. Now, if you take a look of the mangroves, if you see this as a coastal area, this is an ocean. This is an ocean. Now, here it consists of the water bodies. It consists of water bodies. Now, when we move on from the ocean towards the coastal areas, when we move on from there, so this region is an area where we will have the red mangroves. Red mangroves. Red mangroves. And these red mangroves, their characteristics, you don't have to buy it. In prelims, if they ask, they are the highest among all the mangroves. Or we say they are the tallest among all the mangroves. Tallest among all the mangroves. Red mangroves. Tallest among all the mangroves. They can reach up to 80 feet. and they are red in the colors. And the roots of them, we refer them as the walking tree, right? And they are near the coastal areas, that is near the shore regions. Now, when we move on still more further, so there we find a vegetation, a mangrove, which is lesser than height, which we refer them as black mangrove, which is found closer to the red mangrove but further inland. And here it is black because of the dark brown color of the wood. Remember this point, that is more than sufficient. Don't write in detail about that. Then when you move still further to that, we have something called as white mangroves. When we still move further, we are having white mangroves. And these white mangroves is relatively shorter, relatively shorter, and it lives further inland than the red and black mangroves. So this is red mangrove, this is black mangrove, and this is white mangrove. Three types of mangroves. Now they will never ask you in detail about them, but remember their position. Walking tree because they are having these roots which faster, which spreads faster there. Sometimes because of that, the tree makes its change in the position very slightly due to that roots, due to that roots. And this is how their locations are: red mangroves, black mangroves, and white mangroves from this region. So this is as low high tide, and this is referred as the this is low tide and this is high tide, and we refer this as intertidal area. Intertidal area. Is it clear? So this is some rough idea about the mangroves. Right. Now, if you take a look of the significance of mangroves, significance means their benefits, what they provide to us. So mangroves means big trees, big roots will be there. So we will find many insects will take shelter there. Many fish will take shelter there. Many vegetation will grow there. Many grasses will grow in that area when the water moves and fro. To and fro are there. So these mangroves, as they are ecotones, as they are wetlands, so they will be obviously rich in biodiversity. So here they provide fisheries, marine food resources, timbers, and fodder. So many mangroves have been destroyed by using of the timbers, where they use the wood for many activities. They have used the wood of the, take an example of Pichavaram mangrove in India, which has been deforested mainly because of the wood which is used for activities, economic activities or commercial activities there. So they provide many benefits, including fisheries, marine food, food resources, etc. They provide potential source for recreation and tourism. Take an example of Sundarban, where you visit there for recreation, and it is an important tourist place where revenues are generated. And big roots, when they are seen in the coastal areas, the rivers, when they bring large amount of sediments, they keep the sediments within them. And whatever the soils which are there in the coastal areas, as they reduce the velocity of rivers, then the soil will be staying in that area. So they prevent the soil erosion. They will not allow the soil to move out of the coastal region. They will hold the soil. And these big trees, when they have the roots, so within these roots, large amount of soil will deposit. Large amount of soil will deposit. So the first one is they will hold the soil. They will not allow for erosion. Second one is that they will make the deposition of soil. Many soil will deposit also. Deposition of soil is done, and this deposition of soil is done by either by the waves or by rivers. either by the waves or by the rivers. Large soil will deposit here. And when the soil will deposit here, so it will something which will create the new land. It will create the new land here. And then they are referred as bioshields. Bioshields means first line of protection during the disasters like tsunamis, cyclones, etc. So they are referred as the first line of protection. First line of protection during the disasters like cyclones, tsunamis, etc. So they always protect the coastal communities. They always protect the coastal communities. So, in the context of tsunamis of 2004, large amount of mangroves were destroyed in the Chennai. That is where large losses were there in Chennai. The mangroves were destroyed in the year 2004, and hence large amount of the saline water entered into the coastal areas because these bioshields, these mangroves, they act as a barrier for the height waves. So they will act as a barrier for the high altitude waves, which will stop them to enter into that region. Then these are the areas which store large amount of the carbon sequestration, and the carbon which is stored in them, we refer that as blue carbon. It will store large amount of carbon. We refer that as blue carbon, which is stored in them. Then they also perform other services like purifying the water, and they also absorb the pollutants. They will also absorb the pollutants. Now, this I'll take up in detail when I take the pollution. When the large trees are used to absorb the pollutant, when the big trees are used to absorb the pollutants, and these trees will absorb the pollutant either through the roots or they will absorb and keep them in their shoots, right? So big trees which are used to reduce the pollutants, absorb the pollutants, which is a part of bioremediation. So big trees which are used there, we refer that as phytoremediation. Phytoremediation. So this is called as phytoremediation. Remediation. Please remember the terms phytoremediation, phyto, pteridophytes, phyto. Phyto means big trees which are used to reduce the pollutant like mercury pollutant, etc. Right? Arsenic pollutant, etc. So we refer them as phytoremediation. Then they are the main source. They are the main source of generation of shoreline communities. So they provide economic benefit to them. How? By fishing activities, cultivating of the weeds, shrimp, etc. So they generate the income to the local communities. Then they provide breeding and nursery grounds for many variety of marine species like insects, small fish, etc. So they become a ground for many marine which take shelter. And when they take shelter in that region, by default, they become rich in biodiversity. They become rich in biodiversity. Rich in biodiversities. Right. Now, this is what we refer them as significance, or we say benefits of mangroves, or we say services which are provided by the mangroves. Benefits or services, both are same. Both are same. The moment when we say service, it is also same. Benefit, it is also the same. Right. Now, these mangroves, they have certain threats also. The threat is pollution. Pollution. Pollution from industries, or pollution can be from urban areas, or this pollution can be from oil leakage, oil leakage. Oil leakage. And this oil leakage can be oil leakage. That means we say oil spills, oil leakage or oil spills, oil leakage or oil spills. It can be due to accidents or leakage from the barriers, or leakage from the barriers, or from the tanks, oil spills, what we say. And these pollutants from industries, urban areas, or oil spills, they are always threat to the mangroves. Threat to the mangroves. Second one is global warming and climate change. Now, what is the impact of global warming and climate change in the mangroves? Now, here you should remember two things. The mangroves, they have adapted over a period of a time, adapted for a period of a time, which we refer them as salt tolerant. Salt tolerant. So they are adapted to the salt tolerant. It is something like this. It is something like this. You are having a baby, a human baby, who has adapted to survive out of the water on the land area. But a baby fish, it has adapted to survive in the water body. Now, if you take the baby fish out of the water and keep it on the land area, presuming that it is having a tear, so can the baby fish survive? It can't survive because it has adapted to that water condition. And the baby human has adapted to the terrestrial condition. He can't survive in the aquatic condition. Now, the same way, the mangroves have adapted to the salt tolerance because of their modification, like succulent leaves and negative geotrophic roots, etc. So they are adapted to the salt tolerant. So they survive very well if the salt is tolerant. So if the water is salt, so they survive very well if it is saline water. If it is saline water. Now, due to global warming and climate change, the melting of the glacier, the melting of the ice will add fresh water. Will add the fresh water. So this fresh water will become a threat for their survival. This fresh water will become a threat because they are adapted to the saline conditions. They are adapted to the saline conditions. So in the fresh water, their productivity decreases. That is one. Second, due to the melting of the glacier, the submergence of coastal areas will be there. And if they submerge deeper, then they can also have a threat. If it is beyond their limit, generally we refer that as tolerance limit. So they have tolerance up to certain depth. If it is completely submerged, then they can't survive. So global warming and climate change poses major threat to the mangrove biodiversities. Logging means deforestation, cutting up of the mangroves. Deforestation, that is cutting the mangroves for timbers, etc. Then coastal development. If you are taking any big projects, big projects in that areas, or constructing of the big ports in that areas, so many coastal developments will have an impact on the mangroves if it is done unscientific way. If it is done unscientific way. Unscientific way. Unscientific means any project which is set up without environment impact assessment. It means any project without environment impact assessment is a threat. So when I take EIA, maybe next weekend, so I will discuss that. EIA means environment impact assessment. So it is to assess the environmental impact of the proposed project in that area. Environmental impact of the proposed project in that area. We refer that as EIA. Initially, before setting the project, EIA is done before setting the project. Before starting the project, we make an assessment of that area, that what is the impact of the proposed project on the ecosystem, on the people, and the resources, and we refer that as environment impact assessment. It is to be done. So without any EIA, if we take any projects, then it can harm to that areas. Then agriculture and animal grazing. Agriculture and animal grazing. Right. So just we will complete this, then we can have a break. Agriculture and animal grazing. Now, generally, when we talk about animal grazing, agriculture means they will add large amount of fertilizers, and these fertilizers they have chemicals, and these chemicals can be dangerous in the context of the mangroves. Now, animal grazing. Now, sometimes when the water retreats during the summer season, when the water retreats during the summer season, so that areas are used by the cattle herders. That area is used by the cattle herders as a pasture land for grazing. And these cattle, they eat up all the plants. They eat all vegetations there, all plants or vegetation there, which are having medicinal values, which are having something fruit bearing capacities, by which the entire mangroves can be destroyed here. So agriculture and animal grazing can also be a threat to the mangroves. They can be a threat to the mangroves. So advantages we have discussed. Then the threat to the mangroves. Threat to the mangroves. Right. Then mangroves in India. Another 5 minutes we can break. We can have a long break of 15 minutes. We can have a break. Mangroves in India. Right. So animal grazing means sometimes during when the water level recedes, when the water level recedes there, due to less rainfall or due to less amount of water in the rivers, so that area will not be having surplus water which can be pushed till the low tide areas or high tide areas. So in that areas, some areas where the vegetation is exposed for the cattle, so cattle when they reach that areas for grazing, so they eat up the important, the floras, important plants which are there, the leaves they will eat up, including the stems of that, which becomes a threat for the mangroves there. Right. Now, mangroves in India. India has 3.3% of global mangroves, which makes 0.15% of country's geographical area. And 20% of the population depends on that. And the economic services, economic benefit, what we get from them, economic benefit, what we get from them, like fishing activities, timbers, like other activities which have been done by them. So that will generate 1.07% of the GDP. And the total mangroves land of India is 4,992 square kilometers. 4,992 square kilometers. That is the total mangroves of India. Now, this data is based on State of Forest report. And I'll discuss State of Forest report when we take the forests of India. So the State of Forest report is biennial. It is released once in 2 years. It is released once in 2 years. And the last which was released was in the year 2021. And the present data may be another 3 months or 4 months they will release. So this is the data of 2021. This is the data of 2021. So compared to 2019, the states which have shown increase in the mangroves, the first one is Odisha, where 8 square kilometers of mangroves have increased. The second state is Maharashtra, where 4 square kilometers have been increased. This is increase. This is increase in the mangroves. Now, if you take the mangroves location in India, if you take the mangrove location in India, 60% of the mangroves we find in the east coast. 60% we find in the east coast. And 27% we find in the west coast. And 13% in Andaman and Nicobar. And this 13% is in Baratang. 13% in Bharatan. Now, in the east coast of India, the mangroves are, we have the largest mangrove forest of the world, largest mangrove forest of the world, which is referred as Sundarban mangroves. Country with largest mangrove is Indonesia, which is spread in all the length and breadth of Indonesia. But a single patch, a country which is having a single patch, largest mangrove forest in the world, that is Sundarban. Only a single patch. It is only in one area. So it is the largest mangrove forest with single patch in the world. In the world, Sundarban Delta, single patch, right? So don't get confused. The country which is having the largest mangrove distribution is Indonesia, but at one place, the large accumulation of mangroves is there. Mangrove forest is there. That is Sundarban. So Sundarban is the largest mangrove forest of the world. It is the largest mangrove forest of the world. Then below the Sundarban area, we are having a very important one, which is in Odisha. Which is in Odisha. We refer that as Bhitarkanika. Bhitarkanika in Odisha. Bhitarkanika. And south of Bhitarkanika, we have the deltas like Godavari Delta, Krishna Delta, etc. Godavari, Krishna, etc. And then apart from that, we also have the second largest deposits of the deltas in Tamil Nadu coast. We refer that as Pichavaram. Pichavaram. So this is what the distribution of mangroves are there in India, and 27% is there in this area, including Maharashtra, Kerala, and Gujarat region. So if you remember this data for your mains writing also, that is sufficient. 60% in the east and 27% in the west, and 13% in Andaman and Nicobar. So this is the distribution of mangroves in India. Now, which state has largest mangrove in India? Which state has largest mangrove in India? Try to find answer for this. West Bengal. West Bengal. Perfect. Now, this is the last slide, then we can have a break. Last slide, then we can have a break. It's a very, what we say, protective measures in the context of mangroves. Very simple. Sundarban is the first mangrove in the world which is considered for scientific management. Don't elaborate that. It is not required. Sundarban is the first mangrove in the world which is used for scientific management, scientific input, science-based methodology were used and still being used to protect that. Then, Government of India has set up National Mangrove Committee in the year 1976 to advise the government and to about the conservation and development of mangroves. So remember this National Mangrove Committee in the year 1976. Then, then international approach, IUCN and UNDP. UNDP means United Nations Development Project. UNDP. IUCN and UNDP. It is an international approach. International approach, which initiated in the year 2007 to protect and conserve the mangroves. We refer that as mangroves for future. To protect and conserve the mangroves. And India joined that. India joined that in the year 2008. It is an international approach. Now, mangroves, mangroves for alliance, current affairs. So this mangroves for alliance is an outcome of Conference of Parties 27 during United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And this was in the year 2022. And this was an initiation of two countries. It was initiation of two countries, that is UAE plus Indonesia. UAE, and Indonesia, which is referred as Mangroves Alliance for Climate. It means that it is to protect the mangroves for the solution of climate change. Why? Because mangroves are referred as carbon sink. Why? Because mangroves are referred as carbon sink. Mangroves are referred as carbon sink. So hence, if you protect the mangroves, then they will be very important in the context of providing solution to the carbon, sorry, to the climate change. Now, when we talk about UN Indonesia, so countries which are joined to that, it is India, Sri Lanka, Australia, Japan. The countries which are joined to that, Japan, and as well as Japan and Spain, Japan and Spain, right? So these are the countries which have been joined to the, these are the countries which have been joined along with UAE and Indonesia, which we refer them as Mangroves Alliance for Climate, and it is an outcome of COP27. Then to create awareness among the mangroves, sorry, among the people, UNESCO, UNESCO, every year, July 26, we celebrate International Day for Conservation of Mangroves. It is to create awareness about the mangroves, their protection and conservation. And then we are having legal acts, that is Forest Act of 1927, Forest Act of 1972, which provides legal protection to the mangroves. Then we are having Biodiversity Act. So this Biodiversity Act I'll take up later. I'll take up later. And then coastal regulation zones. This is also a separate topic I'll take up. So there are four zones which make the restricting and regulating of the coastal area. So I'll take that in detail. And the program which was started by Government of India, we refer that as MISTI program. So please remember, these are very important for your exams. MISTI means Mangroves Initiatives for Shoreline Habitats and Tangible Incomes. So even if you write the name, that is very significant for the examiner. So it means that if you protect the mangroves, along with that, it will provide benefits to the communities, socio-economic benefit to the communities, creating them livelihood. Now here you should remember that this is a scheme which is proposed at center and state level with an objective to develop and restore the potential sites of mangroves with the help of state governments. With the help of state governments, right? So center proposes that with the active help of state governments. Here it is not only protecting the mangroves and protecting them for economic benefits, protecting them from economic benefits. Tangible income means providing them some financial assistance. Is it clear? So now I think we can have a break. We can have a break and we can start the class after 15 minutes. That is around 4:02. Is that clear? So 15 minutes is sufficient for us to have a break and come back. I hope it is clear to you all. So if anything where it is missing, apologies for that, because this subject is something which is having large amount of facts, and keeping the facts and maintaining the flow is a challenging aspect, right? So whatever I'm discussing, if you remember, 60% of that is more than sufficient. And please read these PPTs in detailed and with careful, right? So we can have a break and then we can come back and start from 4 to Uh, Welcome back. Hope I'm audible as well as visible to you all, right? I agree that after the strong lunch break, it is very difficult to run for 2 hours and all. And that too, when we are having the subject which is having more amount of facts, it becomes difficult for you people to sit and absorb that for a longer period of a time, right? So as it was a continuation, so I don't wanted to break in between, so hence I have made an effort to complete that, so that it should not be continuation there. So even if you remember, 60% of the data for your mains, that is more than sufficient. And for prelims you have to read them, and when you are reading them, if any point appears in your examination, for marking them with the statement, you can take a positive mood and mark it out. Don't get much stressed. Again and again I'm telling you, don't get much stressed. Read them as much as possible and write them. Only when you write more, then the confidence level will increase. If you write them, and you have to practice the writing by using what we refer them as the flow charts and diagrams. Again and again I'm telling you, they will help you a lot in any type of the examination, right? So we made an effort in understanding the ecotone, that is a transition area between the two biomes or two diverse ecosystems. And ecotone is always referred as zone of conflict, zone of tension. Why? Because of species will always compete there for ecological niche. And the example of ecotones are wetlands. Examples of ecotones are mangroves. And mangrove is also an wetland. Mangrove is also an ecotone. So hence they are rich in their productivity, right? So we made an effort in understanding wetland. So wetlands are the areas which are saturated with the water, either temporarily or permanently. We wanted a definition which has to be accepted globally, and hence the Ramsar Convention of 1971, it created a definition of wetland which is acceptable, or which is accepted uniformly to the member countries which have signed that. And that definition becomes same for the countries of the world. That is the depth of water not exceeding 6 meters. So that has to be kept in the mind. Any water, the depth not exceeding 6 meters. And India has more than 6 lakh, 7 lakh of wetlands. Out of that, 80 are referred as Ramsar wetlands. And within that 80, there are two wetlands which are having a strong impact of pollution or ecological changes, where they are having a threat of their extinction. And these two are Kyoldev National Park and the Loktak Lake of Manipur. Right. Initially, it was Chilka. Now it has been restored. So Chilka is removed from the Montrac's record. And then, while defining the mangroves, we made an effort in understanding what are the important benefits of the mangroves, what are the major threats to the mangroves, and then Indian perspective, mangroves of India, and protective measures to protect the mangroves in the context of India. Now, apart from this, you can't expect much questions in these sections. Now, next we move on to something called as the corals. Corals. Now, the moment when we say corals, you should remember that the corals are of two types: the soft coral and hard corals. We always have two types of corals are there: the soft as well as the hard corals. Now, the soft corals, when we say, they do not have calcareous skeleton. So they do not have calcareous skeleton. No calcareous skeleton, right? Then these can stay in any part of the ocean. They can stay in any part. That is beyond tropics also, at deep also. Beyond tropics, and they can also stay in the deep water. and deep water. And most of the time, these soft corals, they try to stay in a solitary, that is alone. Most of the time, they prefer to stay alone, that is solitary. And if you see the projections of that, finger like projections of this, so they are in the multiple of 8. The tentacles, what we say, finger like projections, which are multiple of 8. So this is about the soft corals. Apart from that, we have a hard coral, which is very important in the context of all the studies. So this hard coral, it is having a skeleton which is made up of calcium carbonate, that is hard calcareous skeleton. Hard calcareous skeleton. Solitary means alone, single, right? It is hard one. Then next one is, these hard corals, they stay in the tropical water. They prefer to stay in the tropical waters. Then they can't survive in the deep waters. They stay in the shallow waters. And they prefer to stay in colony. Colony means group. And here, if you see their tentacles, that is finger like projections, they are in the multiple of 6. Finger like projections. Calcareous means calcium carbonate. Calcareous means the skeleton which is made up of calcium carbonate. CaCO3. We refer that as calcareous. Solitary means alone. Calcareous means which are made up of the calcium carbonate. Single of 6, it's not single, multiple of 6. 2 sixths, 3 sixths, 5 sixths. So they are multiple of the 6. Right. Then you have studied that in your geography, but still I'll try to explain that. So individually, if we talk about single minute organism, single small or minute species, we refer that as polyp. Individually, we refer that as polyp. And this polyp, it absorbs the calcium from the rocks of the waters there and convert a hard skeleton for itself. And this skeleton, which is made up of the calcium there, we refer that as calcareous skeleton, which is made up of calcium carbonate, CaCO3, by a reaction which is done, calcium carbonate. So this is the hard skeleton which is made by the polyp by using the calcium carbonate from the ocean water. Now these polyps, wherever, when they find ideal condition, they get attached to the island or to the continental shelf. Any area like island is there, or any continental shelf in the ocean. So you will be having the ocean like this, and here these polyps, wherever the ideal conditions are there, they will get attached to that. And this is where the polyps makes a colony. And a colony of polyps is referred as coral. Colony of polyp is referred as the coral. So coral is the colony of polyps. Now corals are animal. They are small animals. minute animals. So these corals, as they are animals, sometimes maybe naturally or maybe accidentally, when they die, when they die, their skeletons will be attached to the island or the shelf. So the skeleton of dead coral, the skeleton of dead coral is referred as the coral reef, is referred as coral reef, coral reef. The skeleton of dead coral is referred as coral reef. That's referred as calcareous rock, coral reef, which is made up of calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate. And these corals, they keep on depositing on the reefs. They continuously keep on depositing. They do not stay there. They keep on depositing here. And they always move upward and outward. This you already read in your geography. So these corals, they always have the tendency of moving outward and upward. Upward. Why? Because for need of oxygen and need of nutrients. Need of oxygen and need of nutrients. Now these corals, they have a symbiotic relationship with the algae. That's what I explained in mutualism. So these corals, they have a symbiotic relationship with an algae, that is zooxanthellae. Zooxanthellae. So symbiotic means it is give and take relationship. Give and take relationship. It means that both survive in the presence of each other. Now what algae provides to the coral? This zooxanthellae provides color to the coral. And second one is it provides food to the coral. Color and food to coral. Right. Then what the coral provides to the algae? What does the coral provides to the algae? The coral provides physical support, and second one is raw materials for its activities. Raw material. Now remember this. Algae is a zooxanthellae. Algae means it is a plant. And how it produces its food? It produces the food by a process called as photosynthesis. Now, as it needs sunlight for its survival, so can algae stay in the deep water or it stays in the shallow water for the need of sunlight or for photosynthesis? So it has to be surviving in the shallow waters. It can't survive in the deep waters. It can stay in the shallow water. It can be shallow water because sunlight, photic zone, what we say. So as it needs sunlight for its survival, sunlight for photosynthesis, so this zooxanthellae will prefer to stay in the shallow water. And hence the corals always stray in the shallow water. So hence these hard corals, they stay in the shallow water. Why? Because of this symbiotic relationship. As the algae performs photosynthesis only in the shallow water, and both connectivity is very important to maintain their relationship. Coral cannot survive without zooxanthellae, and zooxanthellae cannot survive with the corals. So such type of relationship, that is mutualism type of relationship, is seen in between coral and algae, right? So single species, we refer that as polyp. Wherever ideal conditions are there, like shallow water, temperature of 20 to 30 degrees, clean saline water, so we refer them as ideal conditions. I'll repeat. Ideal conditions include shallow water, temperature of 20 degrees to 30 degrees centigrade, clean saline water, clean saline water. So wherever such conditions are there, these polyps, they get attached to that, and then they start building the colony, and this colony is referred as the corals. And when the corals die, the skeletons of the dead corals, we refer them as the coral reef, right? Coral does not have their own algae. Algae are the plants, and coral is an animal. Remember, coral is an animal and algae is a plant. So algae are attached to the corals. Algae are attached to the corals, which provides the magnificent color. Don't get confused. Algae is an animal and coral is a plant. This coral get attached to that. Why? Because this coral provides it a physical support. Coral provides it a physical support. On that physical support, algae attaches. This is something like this. So you are having a coral something like this, and in this coral we find the algae get attached to that. So it provides a physical support. The coral provides physical support, the space where the algae takes shelter and survive the life along with it, right? So hence it provides physical support to that. And this algae always need the sunlight for its activity, and hence the coral and algae both, which are having symbiotic relationship, they can survive only in the shallow water. So this is some rough idea about the coral. And these corals, as they always have the tendency of moving upward and outward, we always have three types of corals. Please recollect this, what you have studied in geography. So what are three types of corals? The first one, where it has attached to the ground, we refer that as fringing reef. Fringing reef. Coral growth is because of zooxanthellae. Yes, coral survival rather than growth, coral survival is because of zooxanthellae. Coral survival is because of zooxanthellae. If zooxanthellae do not provide food, then the coral will not survive. And the colors of the corals are also due to the presence of zooxanthellae. The colors of the coral is also due to presence of zooxanthellae. So it is a symbiotic relationship, like husband and wife, symbiotic relationship, right? So survival depends on the zooxanthellae. Is it clear? So three types of corals are there. One is the fringing reef, and then as the land subsides down, they move upward. Then we refer that as barrier reef. And still when it moves upward, then that creates atoll. That creates atoll. And this is what you all did in your geography. So three types of corals are there. That is fringing reef, barrier reef, and then atoll. Atoll. So this is the first stage, called as fringing reef. When they get attached to that, we refer that as fringing reef. And the corals, they always have the tendency to move upward and upward. So this is called as the second stage, called as the barrier reef. And then again they move upward, and cover this entire island. We refer this as atoll. Three stages of corals: fringing reef, which move upward and outward, always remember, upward and outward, they always move outward. And the third stage is called as atoll. And sometimes when the atoll is completely filled by sediments, like this, a river or any sediments, when it is filled by the sediments, when the atoll is filled by the sediments, then we refer that as atoll island. atoll island. And in this atoll island, we can find habitation. All atolls are not atoll islands. The atolls which are where the sediments filled and completely cover that, where the sediments fill that and completely cover that and make an area for settlements. We refer them as atoll islands. We refer that as atoll islands. Example of atoll islands are Lakshadweep islands in India, and we have a nation called as Maldives, which is an atoll island. So when it is completely filled by the sediments, when it is completely filled by the sediment, then we can find the settlements. So this is what you did in geography. But here in the ecology and environment, we have to understand the symbiotic relationship. Symbiotic means give and take relationships are there. Now, when we talk about symbiotic relationship, we come across certain conditions where we refer them as bleaching of the coral, bleaching of the coral. But before that, sometimes when they ask in the factual data, you should remember that these corals, they are found in the tropical rainforest, sorry, tropical areas. So they are in the tropical water, so they are tropical species in between Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. And these corals, they are having many reefs. It means the skeletons of the dead corals are there. And in these skeletons of the dead corals, many animals take shelter. Small fish, small insects, they take shelter there. Many marine organisms like small fish, insects, they take shelter in that. So it is rich with animal phyla. It is rich with animal phyla. Large amount of small insects, and the fish takes shelter in that. So when they take shelter in that region, in that skeletons, in that structure, that becomes rich in biodiversity. So obviously these corals, because of these shelters, they become rich in biodiversity. Rich in biodiversity. And hence these corals which are rich in biodiversity, they are referred as the rainforest of tropical sea. As they are rich in biodiversity, they are referred as rainforest of tropical sea. Rainforest of tropical sea. But this rainforest of tropical sea has more number of animal phyla rather than plant phyla. Animal species will be more there rather than the plant phyla of the rainforest. So it is rich in animal phyla. It is rich in animal phyla. Animal phyla. So hence corals are referred as rainforest of the tropical sea, which are rich in animal phyla. Now its global distribution, where do you find them? Their distribution. Their global distribution is 30% of the corals are found in the West Pacific. They are found in the West Pacific. 30% we find in the West Pacific. That is Indonesia, North Australia, Philippines, and continental Asia. 30% you will find here. And 30% of the corals we will find in the Indian Ocean. We find in the Indian Ocean, this area. 30% in the Indian Ocean. That is Red Sea, Persian Gulf, and Indian Ocean. Red Sea, Persian Gulf, including India. 30% we find. And then we are having a land which is in between North America and South America called as Caribbean Sea. Caribbean Sea and Caribbean Island, which consists of 14% of the land. 14% of the coral. 14% of corals in the Caribbean Sea. And the Pacific Ocean has 25%. Pacific means Central Pacific. Central Pacific, which is having 25%. So this is the global distribution of the corals. Remember, 30% are in the Western Pacific, which includes Australia, Indonesia, Sumatra, that region. 30% in Persian Gulf, Indian Ocean, and neighboring areas. 14% in the Caribbean islands, and 25% in the Pacific Ocean. So this is global distribution of the corals. Global distribution of the corals. Right. So you can expect the questions from the atolls and all, because they are always in the international affairs. Right. Then, if you see the coral deposits, two areas are there where rich coral biodiversities are there, and they are very important places. The first place is referred as the Great Barrier Reef, which is always in the news. Great Barrier Reef. Great Barrier Reef. And this Great Barrier Reef is in the north eastern side of Australia. This is east, this is west, this is north, and this is south. So we say it is in the northeastern side of Australia. Northeast of Australia. And along with rich biodiversity, it is UNESCO's World Heritage Site. Along with rich biodiversity, it is also UNESCO's World Heritage Site. UNESCO's World Heritage Site. Right. And this Great Barrier Reef is always in the news for event called as mass bleaching. Mass bleaching. I'll explain what is mass bleaching. Just remember, it is always in the news for mass bleaching. I'll explain what is bleaching and mass bleaching. Understand that. It is mass bleaching for which it is always new. The second area where the rich corals are found is referred as Coral Triangle. Coral Triangle. And this Coral Triangle consists of 6 countries. It consists of 6 countries. And remember, Coral Triangle is not the part of Great Barrier Reef. Coral Triangle is in the northwestern side of Great Barrier Reef. So here you are having Great Barrier Reef, and it is in the northwestern side of the Great Barrier Reef. So if you take this as an Australia, so this is the region where we are having Great Barrier Reef. Great Barrier Reef. And here you will have Coral Triangle. This is Coral Triangle. And Coral Triangle consists of the 6 countries. It consists of 6 countries. They are Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, Timor-Leste, Papua New Guinea, and Solomon Islands. It do not include Australia. It do not include New Zealand. So 6 countries are the part of Coral Triangle. And Great Barrier Reef is not the part of Coral Triangle. Great Barrier Reef is not the part of Coral Triangle. They are two different areas. Two different areas. Is it clear? Okay. Now, the services provided by the coral, benefits what we get from the corals, the same as they are rich in biodiversities. So it means that they provide large amount of the food and fisheries to us. Small fish and all type of the small insects like prawns, etc., which take shelter there. So they provide the benefit of that. Then the soft corals, more specifically soft corals. Soft corals. So they are referred as medicinal advances of the coral. It means they are referred as the medicinal chest of the sea. And these soft corals are used in treating cancer, arthritis, human bacterial infection, and Alzheimer's disease. So these are used in treating these diseases. Right. These soft corals are used in creating a medicine. And this medicine is used for treating these diseases. So hence soft corals are referred as the medicinal chests of the sea. Then as the hard corals, their skeleton is made up of calcium carbonate, CaCO3. CO, yes, memory loss. Alzheimer's means memory loss. rich minerals, limestone and calcium will be there. So they are rich with CaCO3, and this CaCO3 is very important as a raw material for cement industries. So limestone and calcium, they act as a raw material for cement industries. Don't elaborate, just mention point wise. And these corals, they are always used as a protection. May not be strong as that of mangroves, but still they protect the coastal areas. Why? They reduces the impact of the waves. They reduce the impact of waves. The impact of the waves. And they provide stability to the coastal areas and provide stability. Right. And these corals, which have many pores in between them, they are used to make water filtration, like particles, sand particles and all such chemicals which can be filtered within that. So they are used for filtration services which they provide. Then these corals are also used as a part of tourism, recreation and aesthetic services, like scuba diving, etc., where they provide large amount of ecotourism. Tourism means, you should remember, ecotourism. Ecotourism. Ecotourism here. Sufficients are more sufficient. See, headings are more sufficient. If you elaborate also, there is no place for you to elaborate. So if you write the headings with 1 or 2 points, that 1 or 2 words, that is more than sufficient, because they will never ask you 15 marks question only on service of corals. There will be no space for you to write. So hence I'm giving you these points, that is more than sufficient for you to write in the context. And explanations, you can keep it for your prelims. Sometimes when the statements are asked in the prelims, which one is true or which one is wrong. So if you write only the points of that in the services, that is more than sufficient. Right. Now, the corals always have a threat. So always remember, the corals, they have a symbiotic relationship. Understand this. This is very important for environment class. Till now, whatever I have discussed, that is your geography part. Now this is your environment part. The corals always have symbiotic relationship. That is, they have symbiotic relationship with the algae. Corals and algae, they are having a symbiotic relationship. And algae provides color to the coral, and algae provides food to the coral. And coral provides support and raw materials for photosynthesis to the algae. And this is symbiotic relationship. They survive both if they are existing with each other. Symbiotic means coral is required for algae and algae is required for the survival of coral. So both are required. Both presence is important. Both presence is important. Without that, they can't survive. Now, there is a possibility that due to some reasons, I'll discuss what are the reasons. Due to some reasons, coral get separates from algae. Coral get separates from algae. So the moment when the coral gets separates from algae, what happens? Algae, which provides magnificent color to the corals, it will take back its color. And the coral will become white. Algae, when it gets separates, it take back its color. The color of the coral is due to the presence of algae. The color of the coral is due to presence of algae. Now when the algae separates from the coral, it will take back its color, and we refer that as whitening of coral. whitening of coral, or we refer that as coral bleaching. We refer that as coral bleaching. Coral bleaching. Right. Coral bleaching. Now, coral bleaching is not death of a coral. Coral bleaching is not death of a coral. It means that the algae and coral have separated. Algae and coral have separated. So algae is not providing food to the coral. Algae is not giving color to the coral. We refer that as coral bleaching. Now, if this bleaching is continued for a longer period of time, if the separation is there for a longer period of time, if this bleaching is for long period of a time, then coral bleaching will lead to death of coral. So this coral bleaching will lead to death of coral, death of the coral. So the whitening of the coral or coral bleaching is indicating the environmental stress. Coral bleaching is indicating environmental stress. Environmental stress. Stress, which is indicated. Now, what are the reasons for whitening of corals? What are the reasons for whitening of the corals? The reasons are, the first one is periodic exposure. Now, this periodic exposure can happen maybe due to cyclones or maybe due to the storms. So when they expose, they can't survive in the harsh or high temperature regions. So periodic exposure from the cyclones or due to the storms, they wither away from each other. They separate from each other. Then bioinvasion. So I'll discuss what is bioinvasion. Bioinvasion is also referred as alien species which enters there. Alien species which enters there, which is not the native of that area. So we refer that as bioinvasion. And in the context of corals, the bioinvasion is of crown of thornfish. So this is that crown of thornfish. Crown of thornfish. And this completely overtakes the colony of corals and destroys them. So when I take bioinvasion, I'll explain that. Just remember, the crown of thornfish is an alien species which makes the bioinvasion and destroys the coral. And this type of invasion we have seen in Great Barrier Reef. Example, Great Barrier Reef. Then bioerosion or anthropogenic mining. We refer that as coral mining for limestone and calcium. So here bioerosion means unscientific mining activities. Unscientific mining activities. That is extracting the coral reefs beyond which can be repaired. Extracting the coral reefs beyond what can be repaired. And they extract them as a raw material for cement industries. We refer that as coral mining. Coral mining is extracting of the calcium carbonate from that for cement industries. Cement industry. Right. Coral mining is done for cement industries, which provide raw material for them. Raw material from them in the form of limestone. Right. So this is what I told in the initial say. That is limestone and calcium for the cement industry. So this will destroy them. This will destroy them. Right. Then unsustainable tourism. Unsustainable tourism, where sometimes they can harm the corals. Sometimes they can harm the corals. Sometimes the pollution which is released by the tourist activities, pollution which is released by the activity, will have an impact on that. So we refer that as unsustainable tourism. Harming them, physical harm, pollutions which can be dangerous in the context of corals. Then oil spills. Oil spills, it can be through accidents, accidents or leakages. Then global warming. So what is the impact of global warming in the corals? Now, the moment when you talk about global warming, understand the things. Global warming means the carbon dioxide entering into the ocean water. So large amount of carbon dioxide enters into ocean, which warms the water, which warms the ocean water. Plus, this carbon dioxide which has entered into the ocean, it will react with the hydrogen part of H2O and convert the hydrogen into carbonic acid, and we refer that as acidification of ocean. We refer that as acidification of ocean. Okay, okay, I will not be using black and blue. I'll be using either yellow or green. Okay, apologies for that. So here it is acidification of ocean, where the carbonic acid is created by the reaction of carbon dioxide with the water. And this carbonic acid harms the skeleton, calcareous skeleton. This carbonic acid, it will harm the calcareous skeleton, harm the skeleton of coral. And it will also harm the larvae of the corals. It will also harm the larvae of corals. So this is one impact of global warming. Second is, whenever global warming is there, the sea level will rise, and as the sea level rise, the coral will find themselves in deep water. So can they survive in the deep water? This sea level rise in the sea level, rise in the water. So can they survive in the deep water? No, because they are adapted to the shallow waters. So rise in the water when the water becomes deep. So this deep water they can't survive. Deep water they can't survive because the algae need sunlight for photosynthesis. Right. So hence the rising water and the carbonic acid makes the dangerous condition for the corals to survive. And along with the increasing temperature, there is possibility of decreasing temperature also. Right. So whenever when we talk about global warming, one, two, one is carbonic acid, second one is the rise of water, and third one is increasing in the temperature increase. So if the temperature increases beyond the limit, then it becomes very difficult, because remember, the range of tolerance of the coral is very narrow. The range of tolerance of the coral is very narrow. It means that the maximum and minimum temperatures are not high for the corals. Their ecological amplitude is very narrow. Their ecological amplitude is very narrow. It means that the maximum and minimum values are very less. If it is very high temperature and very low temperature, they can't survive. If it is very high temperature or very low temperature, they can't survive. So increasing of the temperature can also be a threat for the survival of the symbiotic relationship. Then extreme cold condition can also be the same thing, what we have seen in the Florida, where the temperature falls very low, and that cold water affected the coral. Cold water affected the coral. Now, apart from global warming, we also have an event called as El Nino. We also have an event called as El Nino. El Nino means where the cold Peru current is replaced by warm water. And this El Nino conditions changes the wind patterns and warms the water, and which becomes a major threat for the coral. And all these 1 2 3 4 5 6 7s are the reason for coral bleaching, are the reason for whitening of coral. whitening of coral, or we refer that as coral bleaching. We refer that as coral bleaching. Coral bleaching. It can be periodic explosion, it can be bioinvasion, it can be bioerosion, it can be unsustainable tourism, or it can be oil spill, or it can be global warming, which includes sea level acidification and increasing of the temperature, or the conditions like El Nino and extreme cold temperature, which can also make an impact on the symbiotic relation. And due to symbiotic relationship, the coral separates, and we refer that as the corals bleaching or whitening of the coral. And this whitening of the coral, if it is continued for a longer period of a time, then that can lead to death of the corals. Okay. Separation of algae and coral is whitening. See, when these stresses are there, unsustainable tourism, oil spills are there, global warmings are there, their relationship is disturbed. Coral and the algae, their mutual relationships are maintained with certain conditions. So whenever increasing of the temperature, whenever decreasing of the temperatures are there, they will create extreme environmental stress. And in the stress, the coral and algae, they get separate from each other. So when the algae gets separates from the coral, it takes back its color which it has given to the coral. And the moment when it has taken back the color, when it separates from itself, we refer that as whitening of coral or coral bleaching. When it gets separates from that, when it gets separate from that, it not only takes the color, it also takes back the food giving capacity to the coral, which becomes threat for the survival of the coral. And we refer that as the coral bleaching. Now, mass bleaching, which is very significant, mass bleaching, which is always in the news. When large volume of corals, whitening happens. When the large volume of corals, when the large volume of corals, when they undergo bleaching. Bleaching means whitening, large part. So this mass bleaching, it is natural, and sometimes it is man-made also. It happens because of natural stress, or sometimes it is due to man-made effect. Man-made effect. But when you take the coral bleaching, mass bleaching, which were some 50 years back, mass bleachings, some 30 years back, or 50 years back, there was a huge gap between two mass bleaching. There was a huge gap between the mass bleaching, right? So gap means there was a gap of 15 years or 20 years there. So there was a huge gap between one bleaching and another bleaching. Huge gap was there. So in this huge gap, these corals would have recovered. Because of this huge gap, the corals would have recovered from the stress. Recovery could have been possible when there was huge gap between them. But if we take the present scenario, that is from 2010 and 2024, this mass bleaching has become a regular phenomenon. It has increased. Mass bleaching has increased in its intensity. It has increased in its magnitude, and it has increased in frequency. So what do you mean by intensity? Now the coral bleachings have become severe. Intensity means they have become very severe. Magnitude, large areas are affected. Magnitude, large areas are affected. Then frequency, regularly occurring in the numbers. Numbers are occurring very fast. Now if you take a data of 2015 up to 2022. So in the span of 2015 to 2022, the Great Barrier Reef, that is the Australian part, it has experienced four mass bleaching. The Great Barrier Reef has experienced four mass bleaching. So every year you will find mass bleachings are there. So when this mass bleaching has become a recurrent phenomenon, it is very difficult for the coral survival. So hence, as it is occurring again and again, the recovery becomes problem. Recovery of coral will have an issue. And this will lead to death of corals. So when they are not recovering, it will lead to death of the corals. So hence there is large amount of threat associated with that. It is something like this. A person is there. A person is there. He met with an accident in the year 2005. And the second accident is in the 2020. So within 15 years gap, he would have recovered very well. Now, in the year 2020, January 15th, he met with accident. Then February 1st, he met with an accident. Then February 30 or 20 also, he met with an accident. So the frequencies have increased and severe accidents are there. So can he survive there? Can he survive when the frequencies are increasing and when the magnitude are increasing? He can't survive. And that is what happening in the present mass bleaching. So the present mass bleachings, they have increased in the intensity, magnitude, and frequency, which have created threat for the coral survival. Threat for the survival of the corals. Is it clear? And hence it is very important to protect the rich biodiversity of the oceans. Is it clear? And that is where a report was given in the year 2008 on the basis of bleaching and death of corals. He has taken the relationship between bleaching and death of the corals. And this report is very important, called as the Wilkinson report, a report which is given by Wilkinson. He has used the criteria, that is bleaching, and this bleaching which is leading to death of coral. Bleaching and death of corals. So he has taken these two criteria and explained the four types of bleachings and explained four types of bleaching. In the first one, it is referred as catastrophic. If 75% of the corals or more than 75% of the corals die due to bleaching. If more than 75% of the corals die due to bleaching, we refer that as catastrophic type of bleaching. Then if 50 to 75% of the corals die due to bleaching, if 50 to 75% of the corals die due to bleaching, we refer that as extremely affected. This is the second type of the mass bleaching. Then third one is if 20 to 25 percentage of corals die. If 25 to 50% of corals die due to the bleaching, then we refer that as severely affected. Severely affected. And if less than 25% of the corals die because of the bleaching, then we refer that as moderately affected. So he has classified all the coral bleaching into four categories. The first one is catastrophic, which is seen in the Central Pacific, where more than 75% of the corals die due to bleaching. The second one is extremely affected, which is seen in the Caribbean Sea and Red Sea, where 50 to 75% of the coral die because of the bleaching. Because of bleaching. Then, severely affected, it is seen in the Indian coast, where 25 to 50% of the corals die due to bleaching. We refer that as severely affected one. Where we find them in the Maldives, where less than 35% of the corals die due to bleaching. So sometimes they may ask, what is Wilkinson report, and classify the coral bleaching and its death. Now it is very, very important because IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has said that if the present context of global warming continues, so this century, by end of this century, more than 90% of corals will die. More than 90% of corals will die. There is a major threat for the corals. There is a major threat for the corals. Is it clear? So coral bleaching, Wilkinson cycle. And this is where the distribution of corals are in India. In India, we find them in Gulf of Kutch, we find them in Malwan, we find them in Lakshadweep, we find in Gulf of Mannar, and small traces we find them in Andaman and Nicobar. So these are the areas where we find the coral distribution of India. Sometimes if they ask in the map, you should remember Andaman Nicobar, Gulf of Mannar, Lakshadweep, Malwan, and Gulf of Kutch. Lakshadweep is completely a coral island. Andaman Nicobar is a continental, but it also has certain corals. Few corals are there which are there in Andaman and Nicobar as well. Is it clear? So next is biodiversity hotspots. What we can do is we can take Lakshadweep has mangroves. Yes, Lakshadweep has mangroves as well. Lakshadweep has mangroves as well. They are having the mangroves, right? So next is the biodiversity hotspots. So before moving down to this biodiversity hotspots, I think you every weekend you have the break at this time 5 to 5:30. So we will have a break and we will resume the class at 5:30. We'll resume the class at 5:30. Have some cup of tea, fresh up and come back, wash your face, fresh up and come back. Many factual data are there and many contents are there. So half an hour is the time where you can rejuvenate and come back, and we will discuss from where we have left.
ಆ ಸಿಗ್ನಲ್ ತನ ಬಿಡ್ತೀರಿ ಇವತ್ತು.